go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 go.
Join Alex Cardinale as he discusses America's worst tragedies and emergencies. He will keep it real with you and share all the details about the emergency, how it could have been prevented, what we can learn from it, my thoughts and more. Tragedy can strike at any moment. Whether it's a fire, a medical emergency or a robbery, we should be prepared for it. Learn from these common tragedies. Post your thoughts in the comments. Now here is Alex Cardinale.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of American Tragedy Hour here on Keeping It Real with me, Alex Cardinale. Today, I am going to break down another tragedy that shocked America, another tragedy that devastated America, and a tragedy that we hope we will never see ever again. Today, I am going to talk about the 1989 San Bernardino train wreck. It was a disaster that went on for a span of about 2 weeks. On May 12th, 1989, there was a train derailment that caused the death of 4 people, with 2 of those 4 people being young boys. And then 13 days later, on May 25th, 1989, there was a pipeline explosion as a result of the train derailment that resulted in a huge ball of fire that burned for 3 hours. Several homes were destroyed, and more people were injured, and a few more were killed. This was a horrific tragedy that struck Duffy Street in San Bernardino, California. It is one of the worst tragedies to ever happen, not only in San Bernardino, California, but also in the United States in terms of train derailments, train accidents, etc. Because when we think about it, first you've got the train derailment that caused the life of 4 people. And then when crews are picking up the trona and everything that the train dropped, that damaged the pipeline, and eventually 2 weeks later, that pipeline exploded, exposing gasoline everywhere, and then that gasoline ignited, causing a huge fire that destroyed the homes that were already pretty much shaken, and a lot of people were left homeless after this tragic tragedy. So after this event, there were some things that did change. But what are some things we can learn from this tragedy? We're going to find out that today. That's one of the topics I want to talk about. I want to talk about what we can learn from this tragedy, how we could have prevented it, and the cause of both of these disasters. So, in May 1989, 2 separate disasters tore through Duffy Street in San Bernardino, California. First, a train derailed, and this train was traveling over 100 miles per hour, carrying tons and tons of trona, and this train was severely overweight. The train crew were given estimates that were not even close to being accurate, so the train engineer did not know that his train had way more supply on it than it should have, and that is one of the reasons why it derailed. So The first disaster, a train derailed and crushed homes. And then the second disaster, a pipeline explosion burned most of Duffy Street 12 days later. So that's the tragedy we're about to talk about right now. So, as always, if you're watching this video, feel free to post your thoughts on this tragedy in the comments. Do you remember hearing about the San Bernardino train wreck on Duffy Street? Now, if you lived around that area during this time, or if you remember it vividly, feel free to share your experiences in the comments. I would love to hear what you remember about this tragedy and what you know about this tragedy. So, having said that, let's get this episode started right now. And we're going to talk about the first disaster, which was the train derailment. And this happened on May 12th, 1989. So, before we talk about the actual disaster and the accident, let's take a look at some of the pictures of impact from the train derailment. So the picture we're looking at here is of the cars that fell into people's houses, the train cars. Very, very scary looking for sure. And then we've got another picture here that shows cars, parts of the train on top of cars and houses. And that was what once was a house. How scary is that, right? Very, very dangerous. And then the last picture I have shows more trains destroying houses on Duffy Street. Very, very scary. Something I would definitely not want to experience, to say the least. So those are images of the event and the disaster. Now let's learn about the disaster. So on May 12th, 1989, at 7:36 a.m., a 6 locomotive 69 car Southern Pacific freight train that was transporting Trona lost control while descending Cajun Pass, derailed on an elevated curve, and plowed into a residential area on Duffy Street. The conductor, head end brakeman, and 2 residents were killed in the wreck. 7 houses on the street immediately next to the tracks were demolished by the wreck, as were the lead locomotives and all of the freight cars. Clerks in Mojive had miscalculated the weight of the train, while the engineer and crew at the head end were unaware that one of the rare helper engines had inoperative dynamic brakes. Hence, there was not enough dynamic braking force available to maintain control of train speed during the descent. When the helper engineer realized that the train speed was not being adequately controlled, he made an emergency brake application which deactivated dynamic braking, resulting in a runaway condition. The train reached a speed of about 100 miles per hour before derailing on an elevated 35 mile per hour curve next to Duffy Street, sending the head end locomotives and several cars off the high railroad bed and into houses on the street below, completely demolishing them. And that is one of the reasons why I am terrified to live near train tracks. Because what if another freight train that is overloaded with freight speeds and then it derails on that curve and it comes plowing into your home while you're sleeping or you're in the shower? You're going to be terrified. And as a matter of fact, somebody was actually in the shower when the train that derailed in San Bernardino fell on Duffy Street. That person was actually in the shower, and his house actually came tumbling down on him, and he was trapped under his own house. It took firefighters several hours to find him, and if they did not find him by night, he likely would have passed away. But he was able to be found, I think it was about 16 hours or so later, and he suffered bruised ribs and a couple of other injuries. But thank God he got found. Very, very scary. Now, upon retrieving the locomotives black boxes, which are event recorders, and the recorded data therein, it was discovered that the third head and locomotives dynamic brakes were not functioning at all. So this freight train did not have third head end dynamic brakes, which is probably why it derailed quicker than expected. Although the sound of the cooling fans misled crews into believing dynamic brakes were functional. It was also determined after the wreck that the engineer operating the helper locomotives knew of the faulty dynamic brakes on one of his units, but did not communicate that information to the head end crew. The combination of weight miscalculation, poor communication, and faulty brake equipment resulted in a total train weight that was too great to adequately control on the downgrade. Once dynamic braking had been defeated by the helper engines emergency brake application, the enormous weight of the heavily loaded cars caused rapid acceleration that could not be resisted solely by mechanical braking. The train catapulted from the 35-mile-per-hour curve next to Duffy Street, scattering locomotives and cars as well as ladding. So the cause of the accident was the weight miscalculation, the poor communication, and the faulty brakes. Those were the three combinations that resulted in this terrible disaster and this deadly train derailment. Now, the crew that was on the freight train that derailed were Frank Holland. He was the engineer, and at the time he was 33 years old. The conductor was Everett Crown. He was 35 years old. The brakeman on the third locomotive was Alan Rice. He was 43 years old. The engineer on helper unit 7443 was Lawrence Hill. He was 42 years old. And the brakeman on helper unit 7443 was Robert Waterbury, and he was 57 years old. Killed in the wreck were conductor Everett Crown, who was fatally crushed in the nose, and brakeman Rice, who was fatally crushed in the cab, and two young boys, Jason Thompson and Tyson White. Jason Thompson was 10 years old, and Tyson White was only 7. They were crushed and they asphyxiated when the train destroyed one of the houses on Duffy Street. Engineer Frank Holland survived. He remained in his seat at the control stand in Unit SP 8278 at the head of the train, and he suffered severe cracked ribs, several cracked ribs that were severe, and he suffered a punctured lung. So Engineer Holland was lucky to suffer only several cracked ribs and a punctured lung, but he was able to live. He was able to crawl out of his wrecked locomotive, and he was helped down by eyewitnesses on the scene. Engineer Hill and Brakeman Waterbury, who were in the helper locomotives, only received minor injuries, and they are doing fine. But they have the stress, and they probably have what's that syndrome called? Victim? No, not victim. It's a syndrome where someone goes through a tragedy and someone dies and they feel guilty about it because they survived and the other person didn't. I forgot the name of it. I can't think of it right now. Shoot. Maybe it'll come to me later on in the show. I hate when my brain and my head has a brain fart. Survivor's syndrome, something like that, but we'll think about it later on in the show. But that is the train derailment. Very, very deadly. So once everyone was okay after that, once all the trains were picked up, once all the Trona was picked up, everyone thought it was back to normal until 13 days later, another tragedy struck San Bernardino, California. And it was the very same area where the freight train derailed. On May 25th, 1989, the pipeline exploded and there was a huge fire. It burst open, expelling gasoline everywhere, and somehow that gasoline ignited. So, buried 6 feet underground alongside the track is a 14-inch high pressure petroleum transit pipeline operated by Calnev Pipeline. The pipeline was marked with stakes during cleanup to avoid the risk of it being accidentally damaged. Pipeline officials remained on site as safety observers during the cleanup of the rail cars, but not during the cleanup of the Trona material. I think if they had been there when they were cleaning up the Trona, this could have been prevented as well. Service on the track where the derailment happened was restored just 4 days after the crash. So, 4 days after the fatal derailment, trains were already back on the track. That is how quickly it moved, and that is how dangerous uh, that was, and probably why it led to the explosion. 13 days after the train wreck, on May 25th, 1989, at 8:05 in the morning, shortly after eyewitnesses heard a train pass through the derailment site, the pipeline burst at a point on the curve where the derailment happened, showering the neighborhood with gasoline, which ignited into a large fire that burned for close to 7 hours and emitted a fume of flames 300 feet into the air. By the time the fire was out, it had killed 2 more people by fatally burning them and destroyed 11 more houses and 21 cars. Of the houses destroyed, 5 were directly across the street from houses that had been destroyed in the derailment, while another was the only house on the track side of Duffy Street to have been spared damage during the derailment. So that house was lucky during the derailment, but unfortunately it got destroyed in the explosion and the fire. 4 more houses received moderate smoke and fire damage, while 3 others had only smoke damage. The total property damage was $14.3 million, equivalent to $31.3 million in 2022, with more of this damage resulting from the fire than from the train derailment, although there were more fatalities from the derailment. So, as far as physical property, houses, the pipeline rupture had more damage. But as far as the loss of human life, the train derailment had more tragic loss. The train derailment had 4 people die, while the pipeline had 2 people die. So altogether, as a combined total in the San Bernardino train wreck, 6 people lost their lives in this horrific tragedy. Very, very sad. So that is the uh, that is the train derailment and the pipeline rupture and fire. So here is an image that was published in the San Bernardino newspaper showing an image of the fire that actually happened during the pipeline explosion. That is crazy to look at, right? Very, very, very scary. I can imagine the fear that the residents of San Bernardino, California, were under. Very, very crazy times for sure. So let's talk about the aftermath of this disaster. In 1989, attempts to have the Calnev Pipeline kept shut off after its failure were unsuccessful. Many residents received settlements from Southern Pacific, which is the train company, and or Calnev, which is the pipeline company. And many of these residents moved after this disaster, and you can't blame them. The plots on the south side of Duffy Street, closest to the rail line, were rezoned as open space by the city so they would not be rebuilt. Other nearby plots, which could be redeveloped, sat empty for years, though as of 2016, at least 3 houses have been rebuilt there. Southern Pacific also changed its cargo weight procedures, which require that the clerks assume that every freight car on every train was carrying the maximum load it was designed to carry if the submitted paperwork did not indicate a weight. By assuming the maximum weight of the train, that would guarantee that the dispatcher would assign at least the minimum number of locomotives needed to ensure the train would have enough braking capacity needed to keep the train under control on steep grades. 7 years after the accident, Southern Pacific was bought up by Union Pacific, which still runs trains over the rails where the derailment happened. All 4 of the locomotives at the front of the train were damaged beyond repair and were destroyed. They were sold for parts to Precision National and they were scrapped at the crash site. So, now we're going to talk about the actual cause of both disasters and both tragedies. And this is from the investigation that was completed to find out what actually was the reason behind the San Bernardino train derailment and then the San Bernardino pipeline explosion. So here are the causes of both accidents, and we'll start with the train derailment. Much of the NTSB's investigations into the 2 disasters were focused on the activities surrounding the derailment. We already know that the freight train was carrying trona that had been mined and loaded onto the freight cars for shipment to a buyer. The shipment would move by rail to the port of Los Angeles, then by ship to Colombia, South America. This would be the second such shipment. The buyer had purchased 6,900 tons of trona. Thus, the mining company Lake Minerals contracted for 69 100-ton coal hopper cars, which were to be loaded by an outside contractor. While the mining company turned in the final contract to the clerk for the bill of lading, they had not filled in any weight under the assumption that the railroad would know that they had filled the 100-ton cars to capacity. That was the very first mistake, not letting people know that there were a lot of trona and the amount of trona. They did not let people know that there were 6,900 tons of trona. Very, very dangerous. So as a result, the train was listed as weighing about 6,151 tons total. 2,011 tons from the freight cars themselves, and 4,140 tons of cargo. Significantly lighter than its actual weight. It was actually much heavier. At 9 p.m. on May 11th, a three-man crew consisting of Frank Holland, the engineer, Everett Crown, a conductor, and Alan Rice, a brakeman, they were brought on to the train. They were transported by company van to Mojave to take control of a 3-unit set of locomotives. So we know that already. The crew departed Mojave at 12:15 a.m. on May 12th, and they headed south approximately 3 miles to Fleta, where they were to pick up the 69 freight cars. Due to maintenance equipment being parked on the track at the south end of the Fleta siding, it was necessary for the train car or the train crew to pick up the cars from the north end, take them back to Mojave, and run around them before heading south to Palmdale, where it was originally intended to pick up an additional helper that will be placed on the rear of the train to aid in braking after cresting Cajun Pass. So that's some information on the train. The two critical factors in this runaway and subsequent derailment were: one, the incorrect train tonnage provided to the crew, and two, the lack of fully operative dynamic brakes on all but two of the locomotives between the head end and helper locomotives. Each hopper car had wheels that were equipped with an ordinary air brake. Critical parts of the air brakes consist of metal shoes that create friction by pressing against the wheel treads when the air brakes are activated. The slower a wheel moves, the more easily friction can induce slowing traction instead of heat. The faster a wheel moves, the more difficult friction is converted to braking power versus heat. So that is very important to know. As soon as the train crested the apex of the grade at Highland and started downgrade on the south side of Cajun Pass, and it's important to note that Cajun Pass is extremely dangerous, it became apparent to Holland, who was the train operator, At the head end, that he was having trouble controlling the speed of the train. When he realized that the train was gathering too much speed, he did all he could to control the train speed using the train's air brakes and the dynamic brakes of the lead locomotives, and he asked the helper engine's engineer to do as much as he could to help also, not knowing that he had only one working dynamic brake in his set. As a last attempt to stop the train, the helper engineer initiated an emergency brake application from his helper locomotive, but this ended up disabling all of the dynamic brakes on the train, allowing the train to pick up speed. After the activation of the emergency brake, the only brakes which were operational were the air brakes, which were now melting from the friction and heat. When the NTSB investigators arrived at the crash site, which was about 12 hours after the accident, they observed that the wheels had gotten so hot that they had started to expand off the wheel axles by the time they left the rails. The train was traveling at a calculated speed of 110 miles per hour when it entered a 4-degree curve just north of the Highland Avenue overpass, which had a maximum authorized speed of 40 miles per hour, and derailed, plowing into the houses on the outside of the curve. All but one of the houses on the side of Duffy Street near the tracks were destroyed. The only house on that side of the street that was spared damage during the derailment was destroyed in the pipeline rupture. 680 feet of track were also destroyed in the wreck. The NTSB report determined that if the train had started down the hill at a speed lower than 15 miles per hour, it might have been possible for the crew to regain control of their train and brake. It was also discovered that the SP's engineer training program did not have any material on how to regain control of a runaway train, and the railroad's oversight on mounting operations was inadequate. The report stated that the derailment was inevitable due to the number of unfortunate circumstances that happened during the trip. The engineers were found to not be at fault at all, as they acted within reason. So the reasons for the train derailment: too much tonnage. The train was heavier than thought, and speed is what caused the train derailment. Now let's talk about what caused the pipeline to burst. The initial inspections of specific portions of the pipeline found no damage from the wreck, and so they deemed it safe to recharge the pipeline with product at full pressure. In particular, as this pipeline supplied Las Vegas, Calnev was under pressure to quickly resume the flow of product, and a San Bernardino resident later remarked that serving Las Vegas was worth more than everything in their California town. The pipeline operators monitored the initial flow in the pipeline, and as there was no leakage, everything was assumed to be fine. After Calnev's initial inspection and product refill, cleanup of the train wreckage began. The hoppers were removed first, a process which took 2 days. On May 15th, the locomotives were removed, and the houses that had been damaged were also demolished, and 680 feet of track was rebuilt. An excavator was then brought in to remove trona spills from the freight cars starting on May 16th, the same day that Train service resumed service on the track through the crash site and ending on May 19th, 6 days before the rupture. Despite stakes being placed along the pipeline's route to show where it was to the crews cleaning up the spilled trona, the cleanup nonetheless caused undetected damage to the pipeline. NTSB investigators found gashes that were determined to have been left by a backhoe cleaning up the spilled cargo. So the cleanup equipment caused the pipeline explosion. Over time, these gashes caused the integrity of the pipeline to weaken and eventually rupture. During cleanup, Calnev only inspected short segments of the pipeline, generally around places where train wreckage had landed on top of the pipe. Other short excavations discovered other debris, including bogies from the hoppers. They did not carry out an excavation of the pipeline through the entire length of the derailment site for a further inspection or a hydrostatic test, either of which, if done, would have found the damage and prevented the rupture. Immediately after the rupture, the pipeline control operators detected a sudden change in pumping pressure, indicating possible rupture or severe leakage in the area, but failed to take immediate action to stop the flow of product. Additionally, the stop and check valves downstream from the rupture failed to close, allowing product to flow back down the pipe through Cajun Pass, which strengthened the intensity and duration of the fire. The valves were already defective at the time of the derailment, and this was not rectified in the 2 weeks between the derailment and the rupture. During inspection of the pipeline after the rupture, more debris from one of the wrecked locomotives was discovered near the point of rupture. At the point of the rupture, the pipeline was only buried 2.5 feet underneath the ground, much closer to the surface than the pipeline had been at the time of the derailment. So that is the cause of both disasters and both accidents. So, how could these disasters have been prevented? Well, for the train, this could have been prevented if the train employees knew how much weight was going to be on the freight train. So if they did not know, they should have assumed that it was going to be at full capacity. And they should have never gone on uh, a freight train knowing that the brakes weren't operating, at least a couple of the brakes were not operating. They should have never gone on the Cajun Pass because that is completely dangerous. And this could also have been prevented if they had inspected the pipeline for any damage after the pickup. All right, so that is everything to know about the San Bernardino train wreck on Duffy Street. This wreck killed 6 people. Many homes were lost. Many lives were changed forever. And it definitely shocked America because now we always think about train safety and what can happen when a train goes off the rails or a train derails. It can have a devastating impact on that city and on that country. Well, I hope you learned a lot about this tragedy, and hopefully, we'll never have to talk about another train derailment in the United States of America. The next tragedy that I'm going to cover is another train derailment, but this train derailment is actually accident where a freight train smashes into a passenger train. It is known as the Hinton disaster, and it took place in Canada. So next week, or whenever I talk about tragedy again, I will talk about the Hinton train disaster when a freight train collided with a passenger train. And that resulted in the deaths of, I think, 23 or 25 people. Definitely a tragic, tragic event. So learn about that next time on Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale on the next episode of American Tragedy Hour. So be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Legendary Alex Cardinale, for more episodes of Keeping It Real with Alex Cardinale, more tragedy shows, and much more. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, everybody. Stay safe when riding trains or riding cars. Do not be a part of a tragedy. Thank you for watching. Hit that like button and stay safe. Have a great rest of your day. Hey everyone, legendary Alex Cardinale here. And guess what? Together, you, my audience, and I are celebrating history once more this year. Can you guys believe that on June 12th, I will be celebrating my 700th video? Yes, that's right. June 12th, I will be hosting my 700th video. I remember my 500th and my 600th video like it was yesterday. You, the audience, make me put out these awesome videos and I lose count. I prefer quality over quantity, but in this case, quantity is quality. I'm enjoying hosting these videos for you. So I, legendary Alex Cardinale, am extremely proud to invite you to be a part of the 700th video celebration. It is going down live Sunday, June 12th, 2022 at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, right here on my YouTube channel, The Legendary Alex Cardinale. I cannot wait to host the 700th video. It is going to be a blast. Chef Alex Cardinale is going to be in the house, and he's going to be cooking and baking. Watch Chef Alex make a delicious homemade French onion soup. And for dessert, Chef Alex will teach you how to make creme brulee, a really delicious pudding-like dessert. So Chef Alex goes French for the 700th video, as he'll show you how to make a delicious French onion soup and creme brulee. That's going to be really delicious. You guys all know that I work at the Palm Beach Zoo. And something special that I'm doing to celebrate 700 videos. I am going to enter the lorikeet loft at Palm Beach Zoo and hand feed lorikeets on video for my 700th video. That is going to be fantastic and definitely legendary. Now, of course, you can't have a party without aquariums and tropical fish. And you can't talk about aquariums and tropical fish without the man himself, Aqua Alex. Aqua Alex will give you a tour of one of his favorite local fish stores. Plus, will Aqua Alex get new fish? And there may also be aquarium topics talked about by Aqua Alex Cardinale. Also, relive the best moments on this YouTube channel. I will play 7 of my best moments from my YouTube channel over the last 699 videos. There will also be other surprises. Will there be any legendary appearances? We shall find out. And who will be special guests if there are any special guests? Will there be a chef? Will there be a fish keeping guest? We will have to find out. So mark your calendars, ladies and gentlemen, and all my loyal subscribers. The legendary Alex Cardinale YouTube channel celebrates 700 videos live Sunday, June 12th, 2022 at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. Come celebrate history, have some fun, and watch a fun celebration Sunday, June 12th, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. Thank you, everybody, for making this a possibility, and I look forward to my next party. I'll see you on the 700th video celebration party, June 12th, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, right here on my YouTube channel.